The trauma bay exploded into chaos as the gurney slammed through the double doors. Blood streamed onto the linoleum in ribbons, dark, relentless, pooling faster than the orderlies could contain it. The patient's chest was a battlefield. 23 entry wounds, shrapnel embedded so deep you could see metal glinting under the overhead lights. No surgeon on duty. No attending within 10 miles. The heart monitor shrieked its warning, erratic, fading, then nothing. Flatline. The sound that meant failure. That's when Mara Kincaid, the quiet night shift nurse everyone overlooked, stepped into the center of the room and said 5 words that changed everything. "Get out of my way." Her hands moved like lightning, calculated, precise, impossibly fast, and within 90 seconds, the dead man gasped back to life. His eyes locked onto her face, confusion bleeding into recognition. "Sierra 9, he whispered. "You're supposed to be dead." The room froze, because soldiers don't recognize strangers like that. And 30 seconds later, the hospital director walked in, just as the truth Mara had buried for 3 years began clawing its way to the surface. If you want to see how this story ends, how the woman they fired becomes the one person they can't touch, stay with me until the very last word. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. Mara Kincaid had perfected the art of being invisible. In the 12 months she'd worked at Ashford Memorial Hospital in Crescent Bay, she'd never raised her voice, never challenged an order, never drawn attention to herself. She moved through the night shifts like a shadow, efficient, competent, forgettable. The other nurses knew her as polite but distant. The doctors barely noticed her at all. That's exactly how she wanted it. She kept her scrubs loose, her hair tied back in a simple knot, her gaze lowered when administrators passed in the hallways. She volunteered for the graveyard rotation, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., when the hospital was quiet and the questions were few. She ate lunch alone in the staff lounge, always with a book open in front of her, a silent barrier against conversation. No one knew that before Crescent Bay, before the modest apartment and the second-hand car, Mara Kincaid had been Lieutenant Mara Kincaid, Special Operations Combat Medic, attached to a unit so classified it didn't have a name. No one knew that 3 years ago she'd been declared KYA after an ambush in a country the government still wouldn't acknowledge. No one knew that she'd spent 18 months in hiding, moving from town to town, changing her appearance, waiting for the shadows to stop hunting her. And absolutely no one knew that the skills she'd learned in those blood-soaked mountains, the ability to keep a soldier breathing when his chest was open to the sky, the instinct to make life or death calls in under 3 seconds, were still there, coiled tight beneath the surface, waiting. It was 2:47 a.m. when the doors to the emergency bay exploded inward. Mara was restocking suture kits in the supply closet, her hands moving on autopilot, when the sound hit her, a collision of noise and urgency that made her spine go rigid. Shouting, running footsteps, the metallic clatter of a gurney slamming into a wall. She stepped into the hallway just as the chaos spilled into Trauma Bay 3. The patient was a man, mid-30s, muscular build, covered in so much blood it was impossible to tell where the wounds began. His tactical vest had been cut away, but you could still see the Velcro marks where the armor had been. His fatigues were shredded, soaked black-red, and his left leg was twisted at an angle that made Mara's stomach clench. 2 paramedics were shouting vitals at the receiving nurse, their voices overlapping, frantic. GSWs, multiple entry points, chest, abdomen, left thigh, lost pulse twice in transit, defib at scene, BPs crashing, 60 over 40 and dropping. The trauma team scrambled into position, nurses, a resident, an ER physician who looked barely older than Mara, but no surgeon, because it was 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, and the on-call surgeon was 20 minutes out, stuck in traffic from a clinic across town. 20 minutes this man didn't have. Mara stood in the doorway, her body frozen, her mind racing. She watched the resident fumble with the intubation kit, watched the nurse miss the IV line twice because her hands were shaking, watched the physician hesitate, just a split second, before calling for blood. And then the heart monitor flatlined. The sound was a scream, high, relentless, unforgiving. "He's coding!" someone shouted. The room erupted. Chest compressions started, But the resident's rhythm was wrong, too slow, too shallow. The defibrillator charged, but no one had applied the pads correctly. Blood was still pouring from the abdominal wounds, unchecked, unstaunched. Mara felt something crack inside her chest. She didn't think, didn't calculate the risk, didn't weigh the consequences. She just moved. "Stop," she said. The word cut through the chaos like a blade. Heads turned. The resident froze mid-compression. The attending physician looked up, confusion flashing across his face. "What?" "Move," Mara said again, louder this time. Her voice had changed, no longer soft, no longer hesitant. It was the voice she'd used in field hospitals under mortar fire, the voice that didn't ask, didn't plead. It commanded. The resident started to protest. "You can't." Mara stepped forward, her eyes locked on the patient. "You're compressing too low. You're going to crack his sternum without touching his heart. Move. Now." For a single, suspended moment, no one did anything. Then the attending physician stepped back. Mara didn't wait for permission. She was already at the table, her hands finding the patient's chest, her fingers positioning with muscle memory so deep it bypassed thought. She started compressions, fast, hard, rhythmic. Exactly 100 beats per minute, exactly 2 inches deep. "Bag him," she snapped at the nurse on her left. 2 breaths every 30 compressions. Don't hyperventilate him." The nurse obeyed. "Epi, 1 milligram IV push," Mara said to the resident, who was still standing there, slack-jawed. "And get me a crash cart with a full thoracotomy kit. If we don't open his chest in the next 60 seconds, he's done." "We can't," the attending started. Mara didn't even look at him. "Then he dies. Your choice." The resident grabbed the epinephrine. The nurse wheeled over the crash cart. Mara kept compressing, counting silently in her head, her arms moving like pistons. She could feel the ribs flexing under her palms, could feel the faint resistance that meant she was hitting the heart. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, 30 more. "Pads," she said. Someone slapped the defibrillator pads onto the patient's chest. "Clear," Mara said, stepping back. The shock jolted the body. The monitor blipped, 1 weak, irregular beat, then flatlined again. Mara was back on his chest before the sound finished echoing. "He's got a hemothorax," she said, her voice calm, clinical. "Probably a torn subclavian. We need to decompress the chest and clamp the bleed, or the next shock won't matter." "We need to wait for the surgeon," the attending said, but his voice was uncertain now. Mara's eyes snapped up, locking onto his. "He'll be dead in 3 minutes. Do you want to explain that to whoever sent him here?" The attending's mouth opened, closed. He looked at the resident, at the nurse, at the blood still spreading across the floor. Then he nodded. Mara grabbed the scalpel from the kit. She didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. Her hands moved with the kind of speed and precision that only came from doing this 100 times, in conditions 100 times worse. She made the incision between the ribs, clean, controlled, and inserted the chest tube. Blood gushed out, dark and pressurized, splattering her scrubs. The monitor beeped. 1 beat. Then another. "Suction," Mara said. The resident handed her the device. She cleared the chest cavity, her fingers moving inside the wound, feeling for the tear. There, a nick in the subclavian artery, small but lethal. "Clamp," she said. The nurse placed it in her palm. Mara clamped the vessel, her movement smooth, unhurried. Then she sutured it, fast, tight stitches that would hold until a real surgeon could repair it properly. The monitor's rhythm stabilized. The room exhaled. Mara stepped back, her hands covered in blood, her scrub soaked, her breathing even. She looked at the patient, chest rising and falling, pulse strong and steady on the monitor. He was alive. The attending stared at her, his face pale. "Who the hell are you?" Mara didn't answer. She was already pulling off her gloves, turning toward the sink. That's when the patient's eyes opened. He shouldn't have been conscious, not with the amount of sedation he'd received, not after what he'd just been through. But his eyes were open, clear, sharp, focused, and they locked directly onto Mara's face. His lips moved, shaping a word. His voice was a rasp, barely audible over the hum of the machines. "Sierra 9. Mara's blood turned to ice. "You're alive." The room went silent. Every person in the trauma bay turned to look at her. Because that wasn't a thank you. That wasn't gratitude or confusion. That was recognition. The kind of recognition that only came from people who'd served together, who'd bled together. The kind of recognition that meant Mara Kincaid wasn't a stranger to this man. The attending's eyes narrowed. Do you know him? Mara opened her mouth, searching for a lie, for anything that would deflect, redirect. The doors slammed open. Dr. Victor Hastings, Ashford Memorial's hospital director, strode into the trauma bay like a storm front. He was a tall man, mid-50s, with silver hair and the kind of face that looked good in press photos. He wore a tailored suit even at 3 a.m, his tie perfectly knotted, his shoes gleaming. His gaze swept the room, the blood, the open chest, the surgical tools scattered across the table, and landed on Mara. What, he said slowly, his voice dangerously quiet, is going on here? The attending stepped forward. Dr. Hastings, this patient came in coding. We didn't have a surgeon, and Nurse Kincaid performed a thoracotomy? Hastings' voice climbed an octave. A thoracotomy? She saved his life, the resident said quietly. Hastings ignored him. He walked toward Mara, his eyes hard. You are not a surgeon. You are not a physician. You are a nurse. You do not have the authority, the training, or the legal right to perform surgical procedures in this hospital. Mara met his gaze. He would have died. That is not your decision to make. It is when no one else is making it. Hastings' jaw tightened. You violated every protocol we have. You exceeded your scope of practice. You put this hospital at risk of a lawsuit that could cost us millions. He turned to the attending. Get a surgeon in here, now, and someone call security. Security? The nurse looked confused. Hastings turned back to Mara. You're done. I want your badge, your access card, and anything else that belongs to this hospital. You're terminated, effective immediately. The words hung in the air like a sentence. Mara didn't flinch, didn't argue. She reached up, unclipped her badge from her scrubs, and placed it on the table. Fine, she said quietly. The attending looked stricken. Dr. Hastings, she just... Escort her out, Hastings snapped. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. One of them, an older man named Carl, who'd always been kind to Mara, looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, if you'll come with us? Mara nodded. She didn't look at the patient on the table. Didn't look at the nurses who were staring at her with something close to awe. She just turned and walked toward the door. As she passed the attending, he leaned in close. That wasn't nursing, he whispered. What you did in there. That was combat medicine. Mara didn't respond. She walked down the hallway, flanked by the 2 guards, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Other staff members peeked out of doorways, whispers following her like ghosts. Did you hear what she did? She opened his chest. Where did she learn that? The cold night air hit her face as the guards walked her out through the emergency exit. The parking lot was empty except for a few scattered cars. Mara stood there for a moment, the wind cutting through her blood-soaked scrubs, the weight of what had just happened settling onto her shoulders. She'd saved a man's life and lost everything. Again. She started walking toward her car, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She was halfway across the lot when the ground beneath her feet began to vibrate. At first she thought it was a truck, then an earthquake. Then she heard the sound, a low rhythmic thumping that grew louder with every second, the kind of sound that rattled windows and made car alarms scream. Mara looked up. The helicopter descended from the night sky like a machine from another world. A UH-60 Blackhawk, matte black, no markings, its rotors slicing the air with mechanical precision. The downwash flattened the grass, sent trash skittering across the parking lot, made the nearby trees bend like they were bowing. It wasn't heading for the helipad on the north side of the hospital. It was heading for the roof. Mara stood frozen, her heart pounding, as the aircraft settled onto the hospital's flat rooftop with a precision that spoke of military training. The side doors slid open before the rotors even stopped spinning. 6 figures dropped out, fast, coordinated, armed. Mara's breath caught. She knew that movement. Knew the way they fanned out, covering angles, weapons low but ready. Knew the body language that said special operations louder than any uniform ever could. Inside the hospital, alarms started blaring. Lights flickered. She could see people rushing to the windows, pointing, shouting, and somewhere in the back of her mind, Mara realized what was happening. They weren't here for the patient, they were here for her. She turned and started running, not away from the hospital, toward it. Because if she was right, if what she thought was happening was actually happening, then the man she'd just saved wasn't just a soldier. He was the key to everything she'd been hiding from, and the people who'd tried to kill him 3 years ago were about to find out she was still alive. She sprinted through the emergency entrance, ignoring the shouts from the security desk, ignoring the nurses who called her name. She ran back toward Trauma Bay 3, her lungs burning, her mind racing through possibilities, through contingencies, through every nightmare scenario she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. She was 10 feet from the door when it opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing navy dress blues that were immaculate despite the hour. Silver oak leaves gleamed on his collar. His face was hard, weathered, the kind of face that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. Commander Nathan Cross, Mara's former commanding officer, the man who'd signed her death certificate. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in 3 years, someone saw Mara Kincaid for who she actually was. "Lieutenant," he said quietly. Mara's world tilted. Behind him, through the open door, she could see the trauma bay. The medical team was gone. The patient was sitting up now, an IV still in his arm, his chest wrapped in fresh bandages. And standing next to him were 4 more operators in full tactical gear, their weapons slung but ready, their eyes scanning the room like they expected a threat to materialize from the walls. Commander Cross stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We need to talk. Right now." Mara's hands clenched into fists. "I'm dead. Officially. That was the deal." "The deal changed the moment you saved Captain Ryan Dalton's life," Cross said, nodding toward the patient. "Because the people who ambushed his team 4 hours ago are the same people who ambushed yours. And now they know you're alive." The floor seemed to drop out from under Mara's feet. "That's impossible," she whispered. "No one knew." "Someone did," Cross said, "and they've already made their move." He gestured toward the window. Mara looked. In the parking lot below, just past the glow of the streetlights, a black panel van was pulling into the visitors section. No plates. Tinted windows. Moving slowly, deliberately, like a predator stalking prey. It stopped directly beneath the emergency exit. The side door slid open, and Mara saw the shadow of a rifle. "They're not here for Dalton," Cross said quietly. "They're here for you." Mara's pulse hammered in her ears. Every instinct she'd honed over years of combat and survival was screaming at her to run, to disappear, to do what she'd done before. But she couldn't, because this time there were witnesses, innocent people, a hospital full of patients and staff who had no idea they were standing in the middle of a battlefield. She turned to Cross, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "How many?" "We count 4 in the van, probably more in the area." He paused. "But we're not here to protect you, Lieutenant. We're here to end this, and we need you to help us do it." Mara's mind raced. "You want to use me as bait." "I want to give you a chance to stop running," Cross said. "These people killed your team. They've been hunting you for 3 years, and now they've escalated to a direct attack on American soil." His eyes hardened. "This is your chance to put them down, for good." Mara looked past him into the trauma bay, at Captain Dalton, the man she'd saved, the man whose survival had just blown her cover into 1,000 pieces. He met her gaze, nodded once. She looked back at the van in the parking lot, at the shapes moving in the shadows around it, at the threat that had followed her across oceans and years and a dozen different identities. And she made her choice. "What do you need me to do?" she said. Commander Cross smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Walk out that door," he said, "and let them see you." Mara walked through the emergency exit doors alone. The night air was sharp against her skin, carrying the salt tang of the ocean that bordered Crescent Bay. The parking lot stretched before her, sodium lights casting pools of sickly orange across the asphalt, her shadow stretching long and thin behind her. Every nerve in her body was screaming danger, but she kept her pace steady, unhurried. Like she was just another hospital employee heading home after a long shift, like she didn't know she was being watched. The black van sat 60 feet away, engine running, exhaust puffing white in the cold. She could feel eyes on her, calculating, assessing, wondering if she was really the target or just another random nurse in blood-stained scrubs. She made it 20 feet before the passenger door opened. A man stepped out. Mid-40s, lean build, wearing jeans and a dark jacket that hung loose enough to conceal body armor. His hand stayed near his waistband as he moved around the front of the van, his gaze locked on her face. Mara stopped walking. Let him close the distance. He was 15 feet away when recognition flashed across his features. His hand moved toward his jacket. The shot came from the hospital roof. The man's head snapped back, a red mist blooming in the air behind him. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, his body hitting the pavement with a wet, final sound. The van's side door exploded open. 3 more men poured out, weapons appearing in their hands, compact submachine guns, the kind you could hide under a coat. They moved with trained efficiency, fanning out, looking for the shooter. Mara was already running, not away from them, toward the hospital's service entrance 20 yards to her left. She hit the door at full sprint, slamming through it just as bullets chewed into the brick wall behind her, spraying concrete dust in fragments. She was in a narrow corridor now, dim lighting, industrial pipes running along the ceiling, the smell of disinfectant and old coffee. She could hear boots pounding behind her, could hear voices shouting in a language she recognized but didn't speak. Russian. Or maybe Ukrainian. She ran. The corridor branched ahead, left toward the loading docks, right toward the maintenance stairwell. She went right, taking the stairs 3 at a time, her hands gripping the railing as she pulled herself upward. 2nd floor, 3rd floor. Her lungs were burning, but her mind was clear, running through the hospital's layout like a blueprint, calculating routes and choke points. 4th floor. She burst through the stairwell door into the surgical wing, empty at this hour, the operating rooms dark and silent. She could hear her pursuers below, could hear the metallic clatter of weapons hitting the railing. She needed to get them away from the patient floors, away from people who couldn't defend themselves. She ran past the OR suites, past the recovery area, heading for the far end of the wing where the old radiology department sat unused, waiting for demolition. The hospital had built a new imaging center 2 years ago, leaving this section abandoned, just bare walls and outdated equipment scheduled for removal. Perfect. She hit the radiology doors and kept moving, weaving through the maze of rooms, X-ray stations with ancient machines, lead-lined walls, heavy doors that still swung on their hinges. Behind her, the stairwell door crashed open. Mara ducked into a CT scan room, pressing her back against the wall beside the door. Her heart was hammering, but her breathing was controlled, silent. She could hear them now, footsteps, cautious, methodical. They knew she was here. They were clearing the rooms one by one. A shadow moved past the doorway. Mara waited, counted to 3. Then she moved. She came out low and fast, driving her shoulder into the man's midsection before he could bring his weapon around. They hit the floor together, his gun skittering away across the linoleum. She drove her elbow into his throat, once, twice, feeling cartilage crack beneath the impact. He made a wet, choking sound, his hands clawing at her face. She grabbed his head and twisted, hard. The snap was loud in the empty corridor. She rolled off him, grabbing his weapon, a Vityaz submachine gun, Russian-made, 30-round magazine. She checked the chamber, flicked off the safety, and moved. 2 left. She could hear them calling to each other now, their voices tight with tension. They'd heard the struggle, knew one of their own was down. Mara slipped into the next room, an old MRY suite, the massive machine still squatting in the center like a metal coffin. She circled around it, using it for cover, her eyes on the doorway. A man appeared, weapon up, scanning the room. He was younger than the others, maybe late 20s, his face tense with concentration. Mara shot him twice in the chest. The suppressed weapon made 2 quiet coughs, barely louder than a cough. The man stumbled backward, his own gun firing wild, bullets punching into the ceiling tiles. He fell into the hallway, blood spreading beneath him. 1 left. The silence that followed was absolute. Mara stayed behind the MRI machine, her weapon trained on the doorway, her breathing shallow. Somewhere in the building, she could hear alarms, distant, muffled. The hospital's security system had finally caught up to the chaos. Soon there would be police, lockdown protocols, evacuation procedures. But right now, in this moment, It was just her and the last hunter. She heard him before she saw him, a faint scrape of boot on tile, moving away from her position. He was retreating, falling back to regroup or call for backup. She couldn't let that happen. Mara stepped out from behind the machine, moving fast and silent. She tracked the sound, following it back toward the stairwell. He was 20 feet ahead, moving backward, his weapon sweeping the corridor. Smart, keeping his angles covered. She raised her weapon, centering the sights on his back. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Mara's training kicked in instantly. She drove her heel down onto her attacker's instep, twisted her body, brought the weapon around. "Easy, Lieutenant," a voice whispered in her ear. "Friendly." She froze. The hand released her. She spun to find one of Commander Cross's operators standing there. A woman, maybe 30, with close-cropped dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. She wore full tactical gear, a suppressed rifle slung across her chest. "Staff Sergeant Chen," the woman said quietly. "Delta. Commander sent me to pull you out." Mara shook her head. "There's still one." "Not anymore," Chen said. She nodded toward the stairwell. Through the wire-reinforced window in the door, Mara could see the last attacker's body slumped against the wall, a dark stain spreading across his chest. "Roof team had a clean shot," Chen said. "It's over." Mara felt something unclench in her chest. "The hospital, lockdown initiated. Local PD is inbound. We've got maybe 3 minutes before this place is crawling with badges." Chen gestured toward the far end of the corridor. "Service elevator. Let's move." They ran together, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Behind them, Mara could hear voices now, security guards, hospital staff, the chaos spreading like ripples in water. Chen led her to a freight elevator tucked behind a maintenance closet, hitting the button for the basement level. The doors closed just as shouts erupted from the radiology wing. "They're going to find the bodies," Mara said. "Let them," Chen replied. Those men were on about 15 different international watch lists. The moment their prints hit the system, this becomes a federal investigation. FBI, DHS, probably CIA. The hospital will be protected, and you'll be long gone. The elevator shuddered to a stop. The doors opened onto the basement level. Concrete floors, exposed pipes, the rumble of the hospital's mechanical systems. Chen moved forward without hesitation, navigating the maze of corridors like she'd memorized the blueprints. They emerged into an underground loading area where a black SUV sat idling, its windows tinted, its engine purring. Commander Cross stood beside it, talking into a radio. He looked up as they approached, his expression unreadable. 4 tangos down, Chen reported. "No civilian casualties. Hospital security is contained." Cross nodded. "Good work." He turned to Mara. "Get in." Mara didn't move. "I want answers. Now." "You'll get them," Cross said. "In a secure location. Right now we need to—" "Now," Mara repeated, her voice hard. "You told me this was over. 3 years ago you told me the threat was neutralized. That I could disappear. So why the hell are Russian contractors trying to kill me in a hospital parking lot?" Cross's jaw tightened. For a moment he looked like he might refuse. Then he sighed, running a hand over his face. "Because we were wrong," he said quietly. "The people who ambushed your team in Kazakhstan, we thought we'd identified them, thought we'd rolled up their network, but we only got the foot soldiers. The people giving the orders—" He trailed off, his eyes distant. "They went underground, and they've been hunting ever since." "Hunting for what?" Mara demanded. "For you," Cross said. "Because you're the only person who can identify the man who ordered the hit." Mara felt cold spread through her chest. "I never saw him. I was unconscious when—" "You saw him before the ambush," Cross interrupted. "At the safe house in Almaty, 2 days before your team was deployed. You were there when he met with your CO." The memory hit her like a physical blow. The safe house. The meeting. A man in an expensive suit speaking perfect English with a faint accent she'd never been able to place. He'd looked at her when she brought coffee into the room, looked at her for just a moment too long. "I didn't know who he was," Mara whispered. "Neither did we," Cross said. "Not until 6 months ago, when Captain Dalton's team ran into him during an operation in Syria. Dalton recognized him from the intelligence briefs, tried to apprehend him. The man's security team opened fire. Dalton's team barely made it out. And then tonight someone leaked that Dalton was being medevaced to Ashford Memorial, Cross finished. They sent a team to finish the job, but they didn't know you were there. Didn't know you'd save his life. He paused. The moment you walked into that trauma bay, the moment you opened Dalton's chest with techniques only a combat medic would know, you painted a target on your back. Because if you're alive, you can identify him. And that makes you the single biggest threat to his operation. Mara's hands clenched into fists. Who is he? Cross pulled a tablet from the SUV, swiping through files until he found what he was looking for. He turned the screen toward her. The face staring back at her was older than she remembered, more lines around the eyes, gray touching his temples, but unmistakable. Sharp features, cold eyes, the kind of face that looked comfortable in boardrooms and war zones alike. Viktor Sokolov, Cross said. Former GRU, current arms dealer, suspected of orchestrating at least a dozen operations against U.S. interests over the past 5 years. He's protected, connected, and extremely dangerous. And thanks to tonight, he knows you're alive. Mara stared at the screen, her mind racing. So what's the play? We bring you in, Cross said. Put you in protective custody while we hunt him down. How long? Could be months, could be years. He's a ghost. Mara shook her head. No. Lieutenant, I'm not running again, Mara said, her voice steel. I'm not hiding. If this bastard wants me dead, let him come for me. But this time, I'm ready. Cross studied her for a long moment. You want to be bait again? I want to end this, Mara corrected. For good. Before Cross could respond, his radio crackled. A voice came through, tight, urgent. Commander, we have a problem. Hospital director just went to the press. Cross's expression darkened. What? He's outside giving a statement to the news crews, talking about the attack, and he just identified Nurse Mara Kincaid by name as a person of interest in the incident. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Mara closed her eyes. Of course, Dr. Victor Hastings, protecting his hospital's reputation, deflecting blame, throwing her to the wolves. Tell me he didn't show her photo, Cross said. The radio crackled again. Negative. He showed her photo. It's already on 3 local news sites. Chen swore under her breath. Cross turned to Mara, his face grim. Get in the vehicle. Right now. This time Mara didn't argue. She climbed into the back seat of the SUV, Chen sliding in beside her. Cross took the passenger seat, already barking orders into his radio. I want a full media blackout on Kincaid's identity. Contact the news stations, tell them she's part of an ongoing federal investigation, and any further coverage compromises national security. And get me a line to FBI counterintelligence. We need to know if Sokolov has assets in the area. The SUV pulled out of the loading dock, merging into the early morning traffic. Through the tinted windows, Mara could see the hospital receding behind them, emergency lights flashing, news vans clustered near the main entrance, a crowd gathering despite the hour. Her face was out there now. Her name. Her location. Viktor Sokolov would know exactly where to find her. Where are we going? She asked. Safe house, Cross said. 20 minutes outside the city. We'll set up a perimeter, get you secured, and... No, Mara interrupted. Cross turned to look at her. Excuse me? I said no. Mara leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. You want to catch Sokolov? Then you need to give him a reason to come out of hiding, and the only reason that matters is me. You're talking about using yourself as bait, Cross said. Again. I'm talking about finishing what we started 3 years ago, Mara said. Your team is here. Dalton's alive. Sokolov's assets just got burned trying to take us out. He's exposed, off balance. This is our window. Chen shifted beside her. She's not wrong, sir. Sokolov doesn't know how much we know. If he thinks Kincaid is vulnerable, isolated, he'll make a move, Mara finished. And when he does, you'll be waiting. Cross was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he pulled out his phone, dialing a number. Admiral, he said when someone picked up. We have a situation. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Kincaid is alive and active. Affirmative. I'm requesting authorization to run an offensive operation. He listened, his expression unreadable. Understood. I'll send the briefing within the hour. He hung up, turning back to Mara. You have 12 hours, he said. 12 hours to draw Sokolov out. If he doesn't take the bait, you're going into protective custody, whether you like it or not. Clear? Clear, Mara said. Good, Cross nodded to the driver. Change of destination. Take us to the Harborview district, the old waterfront. The SUV changed course, heading toward the industrial section of Crescent Bay, where abandoned warehouses and derelict piers stretched along the coast. It was the kind of place where gunfire wouldn't draw attention, where bodies could disappear into the water. The kind of place where a final confrontation could happen away from innocent eyes. Mara stared out the window, watching the city slide past. Somewhere out there, Viktor Sokolov was receiving the news that she was alive. Somewhere out there, he was making calculations, weighing risks, deciding whether to cut his losses or eliminate the threat once and for all. She knew which choice he'd make. Men like Sokolov didn't leave loose ends. The SUV pulled into an abandoned fish processing plant, its windows dark, its walls covered in graffiti. Cross's team was already there, 4 operators setting up equipment, checking weapons, establishing a perimeter. They moved with the kind of efficiency that came from hundreds of missions together. Mara stepped out of the vehicle, the cold morning air biting at her skin. The ocean was close. She could hear waves hitting the shore, smell the salt and decay. Cross joined her, his expression serious. We'll set up sniper positions on the rooftops. Close quarters team inside the building. You'll be in the main processing floor, visible from the street but protected. When Sokolov's people show up, we lock them down. And if Sokolov himself comes? Then we take him alive, Cross said. We need him talking. Need to know who else in the government is compromised. Mara nodded slowly. What about the hospital? What about it? Dr. Hastings, Mara said. He fired me, threw me to the media, made me a target. Cross's expression hardened. We'll deal with him. FBI's already opening an investigation into his handling of the situation. Turns out, firing someone for saving a patient's life doesn't play well when that patient is a decorated Navy SEAL involved in a classified operation. He didn't know that. Doesn't matter, Cross said. He violated about 15 different regulations. His career is over. And when the full story comes out, when people learn what you did, what you sacrificed, he paused. Let's just say you won't be the one facing consequences. Mara wasn't sure how she felt about that. Part of her wanted justice, wanted Hastings to pay for his arrogance, his cowardice. But another part, the part that had spent 3 years invisible, forgotten, wasn't sure she wanted the spotlight that would come with vindication. Lieutenant? Chen called from the building entrance. We're set up. You should get inside. Mara followed her into the processing plant. The interior was cavernous. High ceilings, rusted metal catwalks, ancient conveyor belts that hadn't moved in decades. The smell of old fish and mildew was overwhelming. Chen led her to the center of the floor, where a single chair had been placed beneath a broken skylight. Pale dawn light filtered down, illuminating the spot like a stage. You'll wait here, Chen said. We'll be watching from multiple angles. First sign of trouble, we move. How will Sokolov even know I'm here? Mara asked. Chen pulled out her phone, showing Mara a social media post. It was a photo of the hospital, taken from across the street, time-stamped 20 minutes ago. The caption read, "Nurse fired after saving patient's life, now hiding in fear. Sources say she's somewhere in the Harborview district." We leaked it, Chen said. Made it look like a sympathetic witness trying to help you. Sokolov's people will be monitoring all traffic related to your name. They'll see it. Mara felt a chill run down her spine. You're sure they'll come? They don't have a choice, Chen said. You're a witness who can destroy everything Sokolov's built. He either kills you now or spends the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. She was right. Mara knew it. But knowing it and sitting here, waiting for killers to arrive, were two very different things. Chen squeezed her shoulder once, then melted back into the shadows. Mara sat down in the chair, alone in the cold morning light, and waited. Minutes crawled past. Then an hour. The sun rose higher, its light turning the processing plant into a maze of shadows and glare. Mara's muscles ached from sitting still, but she didn't move. Couldn't afford to. If Sokolov's people were watching, they'd be looking for signs of a trap. She had to look vulnerable. Alone. Her radio earpiece crackled softly. Cross's voice, barely a whisper. Movement. East side. 3 vehicles approaching. Mara's pulse quickened, but she kept her breathing steady, kept her hands relaxed in her lap. Visual confirmation, another voice said. 6 tangos, armed, moving on foot toward the main entrance. They were here. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. 3 years of running, hiding, pretending to be someone she wasn't, all of it ending here. The processing plant's main doors groaned open. Footsteps echoed across the concrete floor, measured, careful. Multiple sets, spreading out to cover angles. Mara kept her eyes down, her posture defeated. Just a frightened nurse, out of options, out of hope. "Mara Kincaid," a voice called out, accented English. Not Russian, something Eastern European, maybe Czech. "We just want to talk." Mara didn't respond. The footsteps came closer. She could see boots now, military grade, moving into her peripheral vision. 4 men, fanning out around her position. "You've caused a lot of trouble," the voice continued, "but it doesn't have to end badly. We can offer protection, money, a new life, far from here." Still, Mara said nothing. One of the men stepped directly in front of her. He was older, graying hair, scar tissue running down the left side of his face. His hand rested casually on the pistol holstered at his hip. "Or," he said, his voice dropping, "you can die here, alone, and no one will ever know what happened to you." Mara raised her eyes to meet his. "I know what happened to my team in Kazakhstan," she said quietly. "I know Viktor Sokolov gave the order. I know he's been selling weapons to enemies of the United States. And I know he's going to spend the rest of his life in a black site prison, screaming answers to questions he doesn't want to hear." The man's expression didn't change. Bold words for someone surrounded. "I'm not surrounded," Mara said. "You are." The man's eyes widened, just a fraction, as understanding hit him. But it was already too late. The warehouse exploded with gunfire. Muzzle flashes erupted from the catwalks, from behind the old machinery, from positions Mara hadn't even seen. Cross's operators moved with lethal precision, their suppressed weapons coughing death. The man in front of Mara went down first, 3 rounds punching through his chest before he could clear his weapon. The others tried to return fire, tried to find cover, but they were caught in a perfect kill box. It was over in seconds. Silence fell. Mara stood slowly, her legs shaking with adrenaline. She looked around at the bodies, at the blood spreading across the concrete. "Clear," Cross's voice came through the radio. "All tangos down." Chen appeared beside Mara, checking her over. "You good?" Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Phase 1 complete," Cross said, emerging from the shadows. "Now we wait for—" His radio erupted with static and a panicked voice. "Commander, we have a situation at Ashford Memorial. Multiple armed individuals just entered through the south entrance. They're heading for the trauma wing." Cross's face went white. "Dalton. Hospital security is down, staff in lockdown. We need immediate—" The transmission cut off. Mara's blood turned to ice. "It's a diversion. The men here were just a distraction." "Sokolov's going after Dalton," Chen finished. Cross was already moving, sprinting toward the SUV. "Everyone mount up. We're rolling back to the hospital now." Mara ran after him, her mind racing. Sokolov wasn't coming for her. He was going after the one man who'd actually seen his face recently, who could identify him in court. Dalton was the real threat, and they'd left him with minimal protection. The SUV's tires screamed as they peeled out of the warehouse lot, racing back toward the hospital. Through the windshield, Mara could see smoke rising from the direction of Ashford Memorial. Black, thick, billowing. "What the hell is that?" Chen demanded. Cross's radio crackled again, a different voice this time. Calm, professional, chillingly familiar. "Commander Cross," Viktor Sokolov said in perfect English, "I believe you have something that belongs to me, and I have something that belongs to you. Shall we discuss an exchange?" Cross's hand tightened on the radio until his knuckles went white. "Sokolov." "Indeed." The voice was smooth, cultured, carrying the faint trace of an accent that could have been anywhere from Prague to Moscow. I must commend you on your trap at the waterfront. Very thorough, but predictable. The SUV was doing 80 now, weaving through morning traffic, the driver laying on the horn to clear intersections. Mara braced herself against the doorframe as they took a corner hard enough to make the tires scream. "What do you want?" Cross demanded. "What I've always wanted," Sokolov replied. "To clean up loose ends. You have 6 of my men dead in a fish processing plant. I have your Captain Dalton, along with 14 hospital staff members, in a wing of Ashford Memorial that is now under my complete control. Simple mathematics, Commander." Chen was already pulling up building schematics on her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. She held it up so Cross could see. The trauma wing highlighted in red, showing 2 stairwells, 3 entrances, multiple patient rooms branching off a central corridor. "You know I can't negotiate with you," Cross said, his voice steady despite the rage Mara could see building in his jaw. "Oh, I think you can," Sokolov said, "because in approximately 4 minutes, the Crescent Bay Fire Department will respond to the alarm I've triggered. In 6 minutes, local police will establish a perimeter. In 10 minutes, this becomes a hostage situation that will be on every news channel in the country. And when that happens, Commander, your operation stops being classified. Questions will be asked. Questions about why Navy Special Operations personnel were conducting combat operations on American soil. Questions about classified missions gone wrong. Questions about, what do you want?" Cross bit off each word. "Lieutenant Mara Kincaid," Sokolov said simply. "Alive, delivered to the trauma wing entrance. Alone. You have 20 minutes. The line went dead. Mara was already reaching for the door handle as the SUV screeched to a halt 3 blocks from the hospital. Police cruisers were converging from every direction, their sirens creating a wall of sound. Fire trucks blocked the main entrance. Firefighters in turnout gear milling around, confused because there was no visible fire. "Absolutely not," Cross said, grabbing her wrist. "I'm not trading you for—" "Yes, you are," Mara interrupted. Her voice was calm, final. "You don't have a choice. 14 hostages, Commander. Nurses, orderlies, people who came to work this morning thinking they'd be saving lives, not ending up as bargaining chips. He'll kill you the moment you walk in there." "Maybe," Mara said. "Or maybe he needs me alive for the same reason he needs Dalton dead. Either way, those people don't deserve to die because I exist." Chen leaned forward from the back seat. "Sir, we can set up for a dynamic entry. Clear the wing room by room. And get everyone inside killed in the process," Mara said. She looked at Cross, really looked at him. "You know I'm right. This is the only play that keeps those people breathing." Cross's radio crackled. A new voice, local SWAT commander, demanding to know what federal assets were on scene, what the situation was, why the hell there were bodies in a warehouse across town. The chaos was escalating by the second. 15 minutes, Cross said quietly. "That's how long you have before SWAT makes entry regardless of what we want. Can you stall him that long?" Mara thought about it. Thought about Viktor Sokolov, a man who'd orchestrated assassinations across 3 continents, who'd survived decades in the intelligence underworld by being 3 steps ahead of everyone else. A man who didn't make mistakes. "I can try," she said. Cross pulled a small device from his vest, a button-sized transmitter, the kind used for close surveillance. He reached up and pressed it against the skin behind Mara's ear, where her hair would hide it. "Audio only. We'll hear everything. If you can get him talking, keep him engaged. We might be able to pinpoint his exact location and breach without him executing hostages," Mara finished. "That's optimistic." "It's all we have." Mara climbed out of the SUV. The morning air was thick with smoke from whatever incendiary device Sokolov had used to trigger the fire alarm. Police were establishing a perimeter 200 yards out, pushing back the gathering crowd of onlookers and news crews. Somewhere in that crowd was probably Dr. Victor Hastings, watching his hospital turn into a war zone. She wondered if he understood yet that his decision to fire her, to put her face on television, had painted this target. Probably not. Men like Hastings never saw past their own reflection. Mara started walking toward the hospital. Every step felt surreal. Police officers shouted at her to get back, to clear the area, but she ignored them. She could hear Cross on a radio behind her, barking orders, probably telling the local commanders to stand down, to let her through. The SWAT team members watched her pass with expressions that ranged from confusion to horror. She reached the trauma wing entrance, the same door she'd walked through hundreds of times over the past year. The glass was shattered now, scattered across the pavement like diamonds. She could see movement inside, shadows passing behind overturned gurneys and makeshift barricades. "I'm here," she said quietly, knowing the transmitter would pick it up. A man appeared in the doorway, early 30s, compact build, holding a compact submachine gun with the casual familiarity of someone who'd been doing this for years. His eyes swept her body, checking for weapons, wires, anything suspicious. "Hands up," he said. His English was heavily accented. "Turn around, slowly." Mara complied. She felt his hands pat her down, professional, thorough, lingering just long enough to make her skin crawl. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. Just scrubs still stiff with dried blood from the surgery she'd performed a lifetime ago. "Inside," he said, grabbing her arm. He pulled her through the shattered entrance into the trauma wing. The corridor was a disaster, medical equipment scattered everywhere, ceiling tiles hanging loose, the sharp smell of smoke mixing with disinfectant. She could see hostages now, clustered in one of the patient rooms, their hands zip-tied, their faces white with terror. She recognized some of them. Sandra, the night shift supervisor. Marcus, the orderly who always had terrible jokes. Amy, a resident who couldn't have been more than 26. They stared at Mara as she passed, their eyes full of questions she couldn't answer. The guard pushed her toward the end of the corridor, toward what had been the largest trauma bay. The doors were closed, but she could see light spilling from underneath. He knocked twice. "Come," a voice said from inside. The doors opened. Viktor Sokolov stood beside Captain Dalton's hospital bed, one hand resting almost gently on the injured SEAL's shoulder. He looked exactly like his photograph, sharp suit, graying temples, the kind of face that belonged in boardrooms and embassy receptions. But his eyes were wrong, cold, calculating, the eyes of a man who'd watched people die and felt nothing. Dalton was conscious, but barely. His face was gray, his breathing shallow. The chest tube Mara had inserted was still in place, but she could see fresh blood seeping around the dressing. Someone had disconnected his monitors, probably to keep them from alerting the hospital staff. "Lieutenant Kincaid," Sokolov said, his English impeccable. "Thank you for joining us." Mara said nothing. She was scanning the room, cataloging details. 2 more guards flanking the door. Windows overlooking the parking lot. 3 stories up, too high to jump. Medical equipment she might be able to weaponize if she got close enough. Sokolov noticed her assessment and smiled. "Please, don't waste energy planning an escape. The building is locked down. My men control every entrance and exit. The police are outside, yes, but they won't breach. Not while I have hostages, and even if they did..." He gestured to a device sitting on the counter, a mechanical timer connected to what looked like several blocks of C4 explosive. "I'm afraid everyone in this wing would have a very unfortunate accident." "You'd kill yourself too," Mara said. "Would I?" Sokolov's smile widened. "You're assuming I'm actually here, Lieutenant. This could be a remote operation, a voice on a speaker, a pre-recorded message. Can you really be certain?" He was playing games. Mara forced herself to stay calm, to think. If he wanted her dead, she'd already be dead. He wanted something else. "What's the end game here?" she asked. "You can't hold this position forever. Eventually, they'll come in, bomb or no bomb." "True," Sokolov agreed, "which is why we're not staying. In approximately 8 minutes, a medical helicopter will land on this roof. It will be responding to an emergency request for a critical patient transfer, all very official, all very legitimate. You, Captain Dalton, and I will board that helicopter. My men will disperse into the chaos. By the time your Commander Cross realizes what's happened, we'll be airborne." "And then?" Mara pressed. "You kill us over the ocean? Make us disappear?" "Nothing so crude," Sokolov said. He walked toward her, his movements unhurried. "You misunderstand my intentions, Lieutenant. I don't want you dead. I want you silent. There's a difference." He stopped 3 feet away, studying her face like she was a piece of art he was considering purchasing. "You and Captain Dalton are the only 2 people alive who can identify me," he continued. The only witnesses who can connect me to operations that, officially, never happened. Kill you both, and the investigation intensifies. But if you simply vanish, if you're never found, never confirmed dead, then you become ghosts. Rumors, conspiracy theories, nothing a court would ever accept. Mara's mind was racing. You're talking about black sites. Rendition. I'm talking about ensuring my continued freedom, Sokolov corrected. You'll be kept alive, comfortable even, in a facility far from here. No torture, no interrogation. Simply removed from the board. And in exchange, these 14 innocent people go home to their families tonight. Behind Mara, she heard the faint crackle of her transmitter. Cross and his team were hearing all of this. They'd be moving into position, looking for angles, trying to find a way to end this without casualties. But Mara knew the truth. There was no clean solution here, no tactical miracle that would save everyone. The moment SWAT made entry, Sokolov would detonate the bomb. The moment the helicopter took off, he'd be gone. Unless she could change the equation. I want to see the hostages released first, she said. Sokolov raised an eyebrow. You're not in a position to negotiate. Neither are you, Mara countered. You need me cooperative, not fighting you every step of the way. Release the hostages. Keep Dalton and me. That gives you insurance without the complication of managing 14 panicked civilians on a helicopter. She could see him considering it, weighing the angles. He was smart enough to know she was right. Hostages were leverage, but also liability. 2 trained military personnel would be easier to control than a group of terrified hospital staff. 6 hostages, Sokolov said finally. As a gesture of good faith, the rest stay until we're airborne. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Mara nodded. Sokolov spoke into a radio in Russian. Moments later, she heard movement in the corridor, the sound of zip ties being cut, people crying, rushing footsteps heading toward the exits. 6 lives saved, 8 still in danger. The timer on the bomb showed 5 minutes remaining. Sokolov returned his attention to Dalton, checking the injured man's pulse almost clinically. Tell me, Lieutenant, did you know who he was when you saved him? Did you recognize Captain Dalton from your old unit? I never served with Dalton, Mara said. No, but you both worked with Colonel Marcus Vance, Sokolov said, before he died in that unfortunate training accident 2 years ago. Mara's blood went cold. Vance had been her commanding officer in Kazakhstan, the man who'd sent her team into the ambush, the man who'd supposedly died during a routine parachute exercise 6 months after the mission went sideways. Vance's death wasn't an accident, she said slowly. Of course not, Sokolov said. He was weak, guilty, started asking questions about who had authorized the Kazakhstan operation, why his unit had been sent into a situation with faulty intelligence. He became a liability. So you killed him. I ensured he wouldn't talk, Sokolov corrected, just as I'm ensuring you and the captain won't talk. I'm actually quite generous, Lieutenant. You're still breathing. Mara's hands clenched into fists. She thought about Vance, a hard man, but fair. A good commander who'd eaten himself alive with guilt over the team he'd lost. And Sokolov had murdered him for it. The rage that filled her chest was white-hot, purifying. 4 minutes, one of the guards announced, tapping the bomb timer. Sokolov nodded. Time to move. Gentlemen, secure the captain for transport. The 2 guards moved toward Dalton's bed. One of them started disconnecting the IV lines, while the other grabbed a portable oxygen tank. That's when Dalton's eyes opened fully. He looked directly at Mara. His lips moved, forming words without sound. Vest pocket. Left side. Mara's gaze dropped. Dalton's tactical vest was lying on a chair 3 feet away, cut open but still intact. She could see something bulky in the left pocket. She looked back at Dalton. He gave the faintest nod. Grenade. Mara's mind raced through the implications. One fragmentation grenade in this enclosed space would kill everyone in the room, but if she could get it outside, into the corridor, put distance between the blast and the hostages. Sokolov's radio crackled. Helicopter ETA, 2 minutes. Rooftop is clear. Excellent, Sokolov said. He gestured to Mara. You first, Lieutenant. Let's not keep our pilot waiting. Mara didn't move. The other hostages, you promised. I promised they'd be released when we're airborne, Sokolov said. His voice hardened. Don't test my patience. Move. One of the guards grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. This was it. Her only chance. Mara let herself stumble, falling against the chair where Dalton's vest lay. Her hand shot into the pocket, fingers closing around the grenade. She palmed it smoothly, years of training making the movement natural, unremarkable. The guard yanked her upright. Move. They were in the corridor now, the guard's grip tight on her bicep. Behind them, the other guard was wheeling Dalton's bed out of the trauma bay. Sokolov followed, his expression calm, controlled. The remaining hostages were still in the patient room to their left. 8 people, their eyes wide, their hands bound. They watched as Mara passed, hope and terror warring on their faces. Mara's thumb found the grenade's pin. She had one shot at this. One chance to change the outcome. The stairwell was ahead, 20 feet, then up 2 flights to the roof. Once they were in that confined space, there would be no room to maneuver, no way to fight back. But here, in the corridor, with distance and doors and cover, she pulled the pin. The spoon released with a soft ping that only she could hear. 4 seconds, maybe 5 if she was lucky. Mara twisted hard, using the guard's grip against him, pulling him off balance. He stumbled, his hold loosening just enough. She drove her elbow into his throat, felt cartilage crunch, and then she was moving, spinning, hurling the grenade not at Sokolov or the guards, but down the corridor, past the trauma bay toward the far end where the storage closets and empty rooms would absorb most of the blast. Grenade! Someone shouted. Everything happened at once. The guards dove for cover. Sokolov's face transformed from calm to fury in an instant. Dalton rolled himself off the hospital bed, hitting the floor with a grunt of pain. Mara was already running toward the hostages, covering the 20 feet in less than 2 seconds. She hit the patient room door with her shoulder, slamming it open, screaming at them to get down, get away from the walls. The grenade detonated. The blast was a physical force, a wall of pressure that slammed through the corridor. Windows shattered, ceiling tiles rained down. The fire suppression system activated, sprinklers turning everything into a chaos of water and debris. Mara's ears were ringing, her vision blurred, but she was moving on instinct. She grabbed the nearest hostage, Sandra, the supervisor, and hauled her toward the emergency exit at the back of the patient room. The other hostages followed, stumbling, coughing, but alive. Gunfire erupted from somewhere behind her. The exterior window was their only option. Mara grabbed a metal IV stand and swung it like a bat, shattering the reinforced glass. They were 3 stories up, but there was a fire escape, old, rusted, probably hadn't been inspected in years. Go! She shouted at the hostages. Climb down! Now! Sandra went first, her hands shaking as she grabbed the ladder. The others followed, one by one, disappearing into the smoke-filled morning air. Mara turned back toward the corridor. Through the haze, she could see shapes moving. Sokolov's guards, recovering from the blast, bringing their weapons up. One of them fired, bullets punching into the wall beside her head. She dove back into cover, her mind racing. No weapon. No backup. The transmitter behind her ear had probably been destroyed in the blast. She was alone. A hand grabbed her ankle. Mara kicked instinctively, then stopped. It was Dalton, his face gray with pain, blood seeping through his bandages. He dragged himself across the floor, the chest tube still attached, his breathing ragged. Vest, he gasped. Inside pocket, sidearm. Mara looked back toward the trauma bay. The vest was still there, lying in the wreckage. 15 feet away through open corridor, completely exposed. More gunfire. Closer now. She didn't have a choice. Mara sprinted. Bullets tracked her movement, chewing up the floor, the walls. She hit the ground in a slide, grabbing the vest, her fingers finding the concealed pocket. The weapon was there. A Sig Sauer P226, compact, loaded. She came up firing. The first guard went down with 2 rounds center mass. The second tried to duck back into cover, but Mara was already moving, closing the distance, putting 3 shots into him before he could bring his weapon around. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of the sprinklers and the wail of distant sirens. Mara swept the corridor, weapon up, checking corners, 2 guards down. But where was... A bullet cracked past her head, so close she felt the wind of its passage. Sokolov stood at the far end of the corridor, a pistol in his hand, his expensive suit soaked and ruined. His calm facade was gone, replaced by something feral and desperate. "You've destroyed everything," he snarled. His accent was thicker now, control slipping. "Years of work, millions in assets, all because you couldn't stay dead." Mara raised her weapon, centering it on his chest. "Drop it." Instead, Sokolov turned his pistol toward the trauma bay where Dalton lay helpless on the floor. "Drop yours," he countered. Standoff. Mara's finger rested on the trigger, applying pressure. One squeeze, maybe 0.2 of a second, and Sokolov would be dead. But he'd get his shot off too, and Dalton couldn't move fast enough to avoid it. 30 seconds, Sokolov said softly. "That's how long until the bomb detonates. I reset the timer when your grenade went off." 30 seconds, Lieutenant. "You can shoot me, but you won't be able to defuse it in time. Everyone still in this wing dies." Mara's eyes flicked to the trauma bay. She could see the device from here, its LED display counting down. 28 seconds. "Or," Sokolov continued, "you put the gun down. I walk away. The bomb doesn't detonate. The hostages are already out. Captain Dalton lives. You live. Everyone wins." "Except you disappear," Mara said. "Yes," Sokolov agreed. "But I was always going to disappear, Lieutenant. That's what men like me do. The question is whether you're willing to let innocent people die just to have your revenge." 20 seconds. Mara's mind raced through scenarios, through possibilities. Could she shoot him, reach the bomb, defuse it in time? The odds were impossible. Even if she was fast, even if she was lucky, the chances of getting all three things right were 15 seconds. Movement behind Sokolov, a shadow, barely visible through the smoke and water. Commander Cross. He must have breached during the explosion, using the chaos as cover. He was 10 feet behind Sokolov, moving silent as death, a suppressed pistol in his hand. Mara kept her eyes locked on Sokolov, giving nothing away. "Time's running out, Lieutenant," Sokolov said. "What's it going to be?" 10 seconds. "You're right," Mara said quietly. She started to lower her weapon. "I can't let them die for this." Sokolov smiled. It was a terrible smile, full of triumph and contempt. Cross fired twice. The shots were almost silent, two soft coughs that barely registered over the sprinklers. Sokolov's head snapped forward, his body collapsing like a puppet with cut strings. The pistol fell from his hand, clattering across the wet floor. 7 seconds. Mara was already running toward the bomb, her feet slipping on the wet tiles. She hit the trauma bay at full speed, skidding to her knees beside the device. 5 seconds. Her hands found the casing, pulling it open. 4 wires. Red, blue, green, yellow. Standard demolition setup, but which one was the trigger? 3 seconds. She couldn't remember. Couldn't think through the ringing in her ears and the adrenaline burning through her system. 2 seconds. Mara grabbed the blue wire and yanked. The timer stopped at 001. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then Cross's voice, hoarse but steady. "Clear. Device is neutralized." Mara's hands were shaking so badly she had to set the bomb down before she dropped it. She looked up to find Cross standing over Sokolov's body, his weapon still raised, his face expressionless. "Is he—" she started. "Dead," Cross confirmed. Both shots to the brainstem. He was gone before he hit the ground. More operators were flooding into the corridor now, Chen and the rest of Cross's team, followed by SWAT in full tactical gear. Medics rushed to Dalton, carefully loading him onto a fresh gurney, working to stabilize him for transport. Mara sat back against the wall, her chest heaving, trying to process what had just happened. It was over. Viktor Sokolov was dead. The hostages were safe. Dalton was alive. She'd won. So why did she feel so hollow? Cross offered her a hand, pulling her to her feet. "You did good, Lieutenant." Mara looked at Sokolov's body, at the spreading pool of blood. "I didn't do anything. You took the shot." "You kept him talking," Cross said. "You drew his attention, gave me the angle I needed. That's what good operators do. They create opportunities." Outside, she could hear the chaos of the evacuation. Police shouting orders, hostages being triaged, news helicopters circling overhead. It would be all over the media in minutes. The firefight at Ashford Memorial. The mysterious nurse who'd somehow ended up in the middle of a counterterrorism operation. Her cover was completely blown now. There would be no more hiding, no more anonymity. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Cross was about to answer when his radio squawked. A voice she didn't recognize, clipped, authoritative. "Commander Cross, this is Deputy Director Hayward, FBI Counterterrorism Division. We're taking control of the scene. I need you and all your personnel to stand down immediately." Cross's jaw tightened. "Sir, my team just neutralized an active threat, and I'm aware of what your team did," Hayward interrupted. "I'm also aware that you conducted an unauthorized military operation on American soil, resulting in multiple fatalities. The Bureau is assuming jurisdiction. You and Lieutenant Kincaid are to remain on site for debriefing." The radio went dead. Cross looked at Mara, something dark passing across his face. "This isn't over." Before Mara could ask what he meant, 2 FBI agents appeared in the corridor, their credentials already out. "Lieutenant Kincaid, Commander Cross, if you'll come with us, please." They weren't asking. Mara exchanged a glance with Cross, seeing her own concern reflected there. Sokolov was dead, yes, but someone had fed him intelligence about Dalton's location, about the hospital's security protocols. Someone had made this attack possible, and that someone was still out there. As the FBI agents led them toward the stairs, Mara caught a glimpse through one of the shattered windows. Down in the parking lot, surrounded by police and reporters, stood Dr. Victor Hastings. He was talking to someone, a man in a dark suit, too far away to identify clearly. The man turned slightly, and Mara's breath caught. She'd seen that face before, in Kazakhstan, in the safe house where Viktor Sokolov had met with her commanding officer, the second man, the one who'd been taking notes while Sokolov talked, the one everyone had assumed was just an aide. He looked directly up at the window where Mara stood, as if he could feel her gaze. Then he smiled, and walked away into the crowd. Mara's hand shot out, grabbing the FBI agent's arm before he could pull her away from the window. "Wait," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise of the evacuation. "That man in the parking lot, talking to the hospital director. I need you to detain him." The agent, mid-30s, clean-cut, the kind of face that screamed federal service, followed her gaze. "Ma'am, I need you to come with—" "I'm telling you that man is connected to Viktor Sokolov," Mara interrupted, her eyes still locked on the figure disappearing into the crowd. "He was at the Kazakhstan safe house 3 years ago. He's part of this." Cross stepped forward, his command presence filling the narrow corridor. "Agent, contact your tactical units. We need that individual stopped before he leaves the perimeter." The agent hesitated, looking between them, clearly weighing protocol against urgency. Then he spoke into his radio. "This is Agent Reeves. We need eyes on an IC male, dark suit, approximately 6 feet, currently in the main parking lot near the media staging area. Approach with caution, possible hostile connection to the primary incident." Through the shattered window, Mara watched the man in the dark suit pause mid-stride. His head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something. Then he turned and started walking faster, weaving through the cluster of police vehicles and news vans. "He's running," Mara said. She didn't wait for permission. She pulled free from the agent's grip and ran for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. Behind her, she could hear Cross shouting orders, boots pounding as his operators followed. The FBI agents were yelling for her to stop, but she was already through the ground floor exit, bursting into the cold morning air. The parking lot was chaos. Police had established a perimeter, but it was porous, confused. Too many agencies, too many jurisdictions, nobody quite sure who was in charge. Mara scanned the crowd, her combat training kicking in. Track movement patterns. Identify anomalies. Find the one person moving against the flow. There. The man in the dark suit was heading toward the visitor lot, moving with purpose but not panic. Smart. Running would draw attention, but he was definitely making an exit. Mara sprinted after him, dodging between parked ambulances and fire trucks. A police officer tried to grab her, shouting something about restricted areas, but she twisted past him. She was 30 yards behind her target now, close enough to see details. Graying hair at the temples, expensive shoes that clicked against the pavement, a leather briefcase gripped in his left hand. The briefcase bothered her. Who brings a briefcase to a hospital hostage situation? The man reached a silver sedan, European make, diplomatic plates. He was fumbling for his keys when Mara closed the final distance, her hand catching his wrist just as he touched the door handle. "Don't move," she said quietly. He turned slowly, and up close she could see his face clearly for the first time in 3 years. Angular features, pale blue eyes, a small scar above his left eyebrow. Recognition hit her like a physical blow. She'd served this man coffee in the Kazakhstan safe house while he sat beside Viktor Sokolov, taking notes on a tablet, looking for all the world like a low-level bureaucrat. "Lieutenant Kincaid," he said, his accent American but refined. "East Coast, educated. I was hoping we wouldn't meet again." "Who are you?" Mara demanded. Before he could answer, Cross arrived with 3 operators, their weapons drawn but low, establishing a perimeter around the vehicle. The FBI agents were right behind them, along with what looked like half the Crescent Bay Police Department. Agent Reeves stepped forward, his credentials out. "Sir, I'm going to need you to identify yourself and explain your presence at this scene." The man smiled. It was a politician's smile, warm and meaningless. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket and produced a wallet. When he flipped it open, Mara saw a different kind of badge. Department of State, Diplomatic Security Division. "Deputy Director Robert Castellan," he said smoothly. "I'm here as part of an ongoing State Department investigation into foreign intelligence activities on U.S. soil. I was coordinating with hospital administration when the incident occurred." "Bullshit," Mara said. "You were in Kazakhstan. You were working with Sokolov." Castellan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I think you're confused, Lieutenant. I've never been to Kazakhstan. My work keeps me firmly in Washington." Cross moved closer, his voice dangerously quiet. "Then you won't mind if we verify that with State Department records, or if we check your passport stamps, or run your photo through our intelligence databases?" "By all means," Castellan said. "I have nothing to hide. But I should warn you that attempting to detain a State Department official without cause is a serious violation of—" "We have cause," Mara interrupted. She pointed at the briefcase. "Open it." Castellan's smile tightened. "That's classified material. I'm afraid I can't—" "Open it or I will," Cross said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. The standoff lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then Castellan's hand moved, not toward the briefcase but toward his jacket. Mara saw the motion, recognized it from 1,000 tactical drills. She moved on instinct, grabbing his wrist, twisting it behind his back as she drove him face first against the sedan. Something clattered to the ground. A pistol. Small caliber, the kind you could hide in an ankle holster or jacket pocket. The operator's weapons came up instantly. The police officer shouted commands. Agent Reeves was calling for backup, his voice tight with tension. Mara held Castellan pinned against the car, her knee in his back, her heart pounding. "You want to explain why a State Department diplomat is carrying a concealed weapon to a hospital?" "Diplomatic security personnel are authorized to—" Castellan started. Chen appeared beside them, holding up her phone. "Commander, I ran his credentials through the secure database. Robert Castellan exists. Deputy Director, Diplomatic Security, clean record, 20-year career. But get this, he's supposed to be in Geneva right now, International Security Conference. There's photographic evidence of him at a reception last night." Silence fell across the parking lot. Castellan stopped struggling. When he spoke again, the refined accent was gone, replaced by something flat and cold. "You're making a mistake." "I don't think so," Cross said. He nodded to Chen. "Full biometric scan. I want to know who this man really is." Chen pulled out a handheld scanner, pressing it against Castellan's hand. The device beeped, processing fingerprints, running them through databases. 10 seconds passed. 20. Then the scanner chimed. Chen's face went pale as she read the results. "Commander, you need to see this." Cross took the device. His expression shifted from anger to something darker. Thomas Brennan, former CIA, terminated 8 years ago for selling classified information. Multiple warrants, believed to be operating in Eastern Europe. He looked at the man Mara was still holding against the car. "You've been dead for 6 years. Officially. Killed in a car bombing in Prague." "Clearly the reports were exaggerated," Brennan said. His voice was calm now, almost conversational. like they were discussing the weather instead of espionage and murder. Mara's mind was racing, connecting pieces. You faked your death, started working with Sokolov, used your State Department contacts to feed him intelligence. Used your knowledge of U.S. operations to set up ambushes, Cross added, like the one in Kazakhstan that killed Lieutenant Kincaid's team. And when my team survived, Mara continued, the full picture crystallizing, when I survived, you spent 3 years trying to find me, to eliminate the witness who could identify you. Brennan said nothing, but his silence was confirmation enough. Agent Reeves stepped forward, reading rights from a card, but Mara barely heard him. She was thinking about her teammates, 6 good soldiers who died in that mountain pass because of faulty intelligence, because of betrayal. And all this time, the man responsible had been walking around with diplomatic credentials and a false identity, untouchable. Cross pulled her aside as other agents took custody of Brennan, securing him in handcuffs, loading him into a federal vehicle. You were right, Cross said quietly, about not letting this go, about finishing it. Mara watched Brennan being driven away, his face visible through the rear window, expressionless. It's not finished. He's just one piece. What do you mean? Sokolov had resources, contacts, money. That doesn't disappear just because he's dead. Mara turned to face Cross. Who authorized the Kazakhstan mission? Who signed off on sending my team into an ambush? Cross's jaw tightened. Your CO was Colonel Vance, but above him, he stopped, choosing his words carefully. There were people in the chain of command who made decisions based on intelligence Brennan provided. If they knew the intelligence was compromised, then they're complicit, Mara finished. How high does this go? Before Cross could answer, a new voice cut through the noise of the parking lot. Commander Cross, Lieutenant Kincaid. They turned to find a woman approaching, early 50s, gray suit, federal badge on her belt. She moved with authority, other agents clearing a path for her. Deputy Director Hayward, she said, offering her hand. FBI counterterrorism. I need to speak with both of you. Now. They followed her to a mobile command post the Bureau had set up at the edge of the parking lot, a converted RV bristling with communications equipment. Inside, multiple screens showed feeds from the hospital, the warehouse where the first team had been killed, news coverage playing on mute. Hayward closed the door behind them, shutting out the chaos. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but intense. What happened here today should never have happened, she said. A foreign intelligence operative conducting a hostage situation on American soil. A rogue CIA officer providing him support. Navy Special Operations running a combat mission in a civilian hospital. She paused. Someone is going to answer for this mess. Multiple someones. With respect, ma'am, Cross said carefully, my team prevented a massacre. You violated about 15 different laws and regulations, Hayward interrupted. I understand you had good intentions. I understand lives were saved, but you operated without authorization, without oversight, and without regard for jurisdiction. She looked at Mara. And you, a supposedly dead military officer, living under an assumed identity, performing unauthorized surgery, engaging in armed combat in a hospital. Mara met her gaze evenly. I saved Captain Dalton's life. Twice. Yes, you did, Hayward agreed, which is why you're not in handcuffs right now, but saving lives doesn't give you immunity from consequences. She pulled up a file on one of the screens, classified markings stamped across every page. Mara could see names, dates, mission summaries, the Kazakhstan operation, Colonel Vance, Thomas Brennan. The Bureau has been investigating irregularities in Central Asian operations for 18 months, Hayward said. We knew there was a leak. We knew intelligence was being compromised, but we didn't know who or how high it went. What happened today, Sokolov's attack, Brennan's exposure, that accelerated our timeline considerably. Cross leaned forward. How high does it go? Hayward was silent for a moment, her fingers drumming against the desk. Then she made a decision. 3 years ago, someone in the Defense Intelligence Agency authorized the Kazakhstan mission based on Brennan's intelligence, she said. Someone senior enough to bypass normal verification protocols. We've narrowed it down to 4 individuals, but we need proof. Evidence? Testimony. You need someone who was there, Mara said slowly. Someone who can testify about what happened. We need you, Lieutenant, Hayward confirmed. You're the only surviving witness from that operation. Your testimony, combined with what we can extract from Brennan and what we've recovered from Sokolov's network, might be enough to bring charges. Mara felt the weight of it settling onto her shoulders. 3 years of hiding, of being invisible, and now she was being asked to step into the brightest spotlight imaginable. Congressional hearings, criminal trials. Her face and name plastered across every news outlet in the country. What about the hospital? She asked. Dr. Hastings fired me, threw me to the media. There are consequences for that, too. Hayward's expression hardened. Dr. Victor Hastings is currently being interviewed by federal agents about his decision to publicly identify you during an active security situation. Preliminary findings suggest he violated multiple patient privacy laws, endangered your life, and potentially compromised an ongoing investigation. She paused. His career is over. The only question is whether criminal charges will be filed. There was satisfaction in that, but it felt distant. Mara had spent so long being powerless, being dismissed and overlooked, that vengeance seemed almost anticlimactic. I want to see him, Mara said suddenly. Hayward raised an eyebrow. Hastings? Yes. That's not standard procedure. I don't care about standard procedure, Mara said. He destroyed my life because I saved someone, because I had skills he didn't understand and couldn't control. I want him to see what that decision cost him. Hayward studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. 5 minutes, supervised, and nothing you say can be used to interfere with the ongoing investigation. They found Dr. Victor Hastings in a conference room on the hospital's administrative floor, flanked by 2 FBI agents and looking significantly less composed than the last time Mara had seen him. His expensive suit was rumpled, his silver hair disheveled. When Mara walked in, his eyes widened. You, he said, standing abruptly. This is your fault, all of this. If you hadn't— Sit down, Dr. Hastings, one of the agents said firmly. Hastings sat, but his glare never left Mara's face. I want to file charges, assault, destruction of property, unauthorized medical procedures. You fired me, Mara said quietly, cutting through his tirade. For saving a man's life. You didn't ask questions, didn't investigate. You just assumed I was the problem because I didn't fit your image of what a nurse should be. You exceeded your authority, Hastings shot back. You performed surgery without credentials, without authorization. I'm a combat medic, Mara interrupted, trained by the United States Navy to keep soldiers alive in conditions you can't imagine. I've performed trauma surgery in war zones, under fire, with equipment held together by duct tape and prayer. What I did in that trauma bay was basic compared to what I've done in the field. Hastings' mouth opened, closed. You're military? Was, Mara corrected. Until I was declared killed in action 3 years ago. Until I had to disappear because people wanted me dead for witnessing things I shouldn't have seen. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. I came here to be invisible, to live a quiet life, and you destroyed that because you were more worried about liability than lives. I was protecting the hospital, Hastings said, but his voice had lost its certainty. You were protecting yourself, Mara said, and in the process, you endangered 14 hostages, compromised a federal investigation, and gave a foreign intelligence operative exactly what he needed to find me. One of the FBI agents cleared his throat. For the record, Dr. Hastings, we've reviewed the security footage from the trauma bay. Lieutenant Kincaid's actions were consistent with someone with advanced medical training. The patient survived because of her intervention. Had she not acted, he would have died. Hastings looked between them, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know she was— You weren't, Mara said. That was the point. I was supposed to be nobody, just another night shift nurse. But you made me visible. You put my face on television, and people died because of it. That wasn't entirely fair. People had died because of Sokolov and Brennan, not Hastings. But watching the hospital director's face crumble, watching him realize the magnitude of his mistake, Mara felt something shift inside her chest. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just exhaustion. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Dr. Hastings, you're right about one thing. I did exceed my authority. I made a choice to act when I could have walked away. But unlike you, I can live with my choices. She walked out, leaving him sitting there with his lawyers and the federal agents who would be documenting his downfall. The rest of the day passed in a blur of debriefings and statements. Mara sat in conference rooms and mobile command posts, recounting the events in Kazakhstan, the 3 years in hiding, the attack at the hospital. She identified photographs, signed affidavits, answered questions until her voice went hoarse. Captain Dalton was stable, transferred to a military medical facility where he'd undergo surgery to properly repair the damage from his wounds. Commander Cross and his team were being recalled to Virginia for their own debrief, though Cross had quietly assured her that his actions would be defended at the highest levels. Thomas Brennan was in federal custody, being transported to a secure facility where teams of interrogators would spend months extracting every piece of intelligence he possessed. Viktor Sokolov's body had been removed from the trauma bay, his identity confirmed through fingerprints and facial recognition. His network was being rolled up across 3 continents, assets seized, contacts arrested, operations disrupted. As the sun set over Crescent Bay, Mara found herself standing in the hospital parking lot again, watching the last of the media crews pack up their equipment. The story was too big to contain. It would dominate the news cycle for days, maybe weeks, but at least the immediate chaos was ending. Agent Reeves approached, holding a tablet. "Lieutenant, there's something you should see." He pulled up a news article, time-stamped 30 minutes ago. The headline read, "Hospital Director Suspended Following Federal Investigation into Security Breach." Below it was Hastings' official photo, looking stern and professional, a far cry from the broken man she'd confronted hours earlier. "There's more," Reeves said, swiping to another article. "Heroic nurse revealed to be decorated combat veteran." This one had her photo, not the badge photo Hastings had released, but an official military portrait from years ago when she'd been Lieutenant Kincaid instead of Mara the Invisible Nurse. "How did they get that?" she asked. "Someone at DOD released it," Reeves said. "Officially, to correct misinformation and honor Lieutenant Kincaid's service. Unofficially, because there are people in the chain of command who want to get ahead of the story before congressional hearings start." Mara scrolled through the article, reading accounts from the nurses who'd witnessed her save Dalton, from the hostages she'd evacuated, from Cross himself praising her actions under fire. It was surreal seeing her life, her real life, laid out for public consumption. "There's going to be media requests," Reeves continued. "Interview offers, book deals, probably. You should prepare for—" "No," Mara said, handing back the tablet. Reeves blinked. "No? I'm not doing interviews, not giving statements beyond what's required for the investigation, not selling my story." She looked at him directly. "I spent 3 years being invisible because I had to. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being visible because everyone else wants me to." Reeves nodded slowly. "I understand, but you should know. People are calling you a hero. What you did today, saving those hostages, taking down Sokolov's network—" "I'm not a hero," Mara interrupted. "I'm just someone who did what needed to be done. That's all." She started walking toward the parking lot exit, toward the street beyond where her old car sat waiting. Behind her, the hospital stood against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with light, its halls filled with people healing and being healed. She'd saved lives there. But she'd also lost something, the anonymity she'd crafted so carefully, the quiet life she'd built. Mara was halfway to her car when she heard footsteps behind her. Commander Cross approached, his face tired but satisfied. "Heading out?" "Yeah," Mara said. "I've answered enough questions for one day." "I wanted to thank you," Cross said, "for everything. What you did today, stopping Sokolov, protecting the hostages, identifying Brennan, you prevented something catastrophic." "We both did," Mara corrected. "Your team, Chen, everyone." Cross was quiet for a moment, then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "There's something you should know about Colonel Vance." Mara felt her stomach tighten. "What about him?" "The investigation into his death has been reopened. Based on what Brennan's already told us, it's looking more and more like you were right. Vance was murdered because he was asking questions about Kazakhstan." Cross handed her the folder. "These are his personal effects. things that were never released to his family because they were classified. But given everything that's happened, I thought you should have them. Mara opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were photographs, letters, and a small leather journal. She recognized Vance's handwriting on the first page. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. And if I'm dead, it means I was right about Kazakhstan. Her throat tightened. She looked up at Cross. Did he know? That it was a setup? He suspected, Cross said. According to his journal entries, he started having doubts weeks before his death. Questions about the intelligence, about why his unit was sent in without proper support. He was building a case, trying to identify who in the chain of command had approved the mission. And they killed him for it. Cross nodded. Brennan confessed to arranging the accident, said he was following orders from someone higher up. He won't say who yet, but... He paused. We'll find them, Lieutenant. Everyone responsible for Kazakhstan. For your team. For Vance. They're going to answer for it. Mara closed the folder, holding it against her chest. When do you need me for testimony? Couple weeks, probably. The grand jury will want to hear from you directly. After that, depending on who gets indicted, there could be trials. Cross studied her face. You going to be okay with that? The scrutiny? The attention? Mara thought about it. Thought about standing in a courtroom facing down the people who'd sent her team to die. Thought about telling the world what had happened in those mountains, bringing truth into the light after years of secrecy and lies. I'll be fine, she said. I've survived worse than congressional hearings. Cross smiled slightly. That you have. He started to leave, then turned back. One more thing. The Navy wants to reinstate you, full rank, back pay, the works. They're calling it correcting an administrative error, but what they really want is to have a living hero instead of a dead one. Do I have a choice? Always, Cross said. You can accept reinstatement, go back to active duty, or you can decline, take an honorable discharge, and move on with your civilian life. Either way, you're done hiding. Mara looked back at the hospital, at the building where her old life had ended and something new had begun. She thought about Sandra and the other nurses who'd looked at her with awe, about Captain Dalton breathing because she'd refused to let him die, about the 14 hostages who'd gone home to their families, about the difference between being invisible and being seen. I need time to think about it, she said finally. Fair enough, Cross replied. You've got 2 weeks. Take them. Rest. Process. Then we'll talk about what comes next. He walked away, disappearing into the gathering dusk, leaving Mara alone in the parking lot. She got into her car, setting Vance's folder on the passenger seat. The engine turned over with a familiar cough, and she pulled out onto the street, driving through Crescent Bay as night fell around her. The city looked different now. Or maybe she was the one who'd changed. 3 years ago, she'd come here to disappear, to be nobody, to survive. But surviving wasn't the same as living. Mara drove past her apartment, past the quiet streets she'd walked every day, past all the familiar landmarks of her invisible life. She kept driving until she reached the coast, where the ocean met the shore in endless rhythm. She parked and walked down to the beach, her feet sinking into cold sand. The waves were dark under the moonlight, rolling in with patient inevitability. Mara pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. It rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered. Kincaid Residence. Mara's breath caught. She recognized that voice, her sister, older by 2 years, who'd been told she was dead, who'd attended a funeral with a closed casket and a folded flag. Sarah, Mara said quietly. It's me. Silence on the other end. Then a sharp intake of breath. Mara? Her sister's voice cracked. Oh my God, they said you were dead. They said, I know, Mara said. I'm sorry. I couldn't contact you. It wasn't safe. But it's over now. I'm alive. I'm coming home. She heard sobbing on the other end, heard her sister calling for their mother, heard chaos erupting in a house she hadn't seen in 3 years. And for the first time since Kazakhstan, Mara felt something break loose inside her chest. The iron control she'd maintained for so long, the walls she'd built to survive. She stood on the beach in Crescent Bay, talking to her family, and let herself cry. Because she wasn't invisible anymore. She was alive. and tomorrow she would start the work of making that mean something. But tonight, she was just Mara Kincaid, standing in the darkness, finally coming home. The phone call lasted an hour. Plans were made, promises exchanged. When Mara finally hung up, the moon had risen higher, painting the ocean silver. She turned to walk back to her car and stopped. A figure stood near the parking area, silhouetted against the streetlights. Mara's hand moved instinctively toward her waistband, but she had no weapon. She'd turned everything over to the FBI hours ago. The figure stepped forward into the moonlight. Agent Hayward. Deputy Director, Mara said warily. Little late for a beach walk. I could say the same, Hayward replied. She moved closer, her hands visible, unthreatening. I've been looking for you. Wanted to talk before you disappeared again. I'm not disappearing, Mara said. I told you I'd testify. I know, Hayward said, but there's something else. Something that couldn't wait until the debrief. She pulled a tablet from her jacket, its screen glowing blue in the darkness. We've been going through Thomas Brennan's communications. Encrypted files he kept as insurance, probably. Names, dates, operations. She paused. One of those names is on the short list of people who authorized your Kazakhstan mission. Mara's pulse quickened. Who? Hayward turned the tablet around. The photograph showed a man in military dress uniform, silver stars gleaming on his shoulders. Distinguished features, graying hair, the kind of face that appeared on Sunday morning news shows and congressional testimony. General Marcus Trent, Deputy Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Mara's blood went cold. He signed off on Kazakhstan? According to Brennan's files, General Trent didn't just sign off on it, Hayward said quietly. He designed it. The whole operation was his from the beginning, using Brennan's intelligence to send your team into an ambush, then covering it up when things went wrong. Colonel Vance started asking questions, so Trent had him eliminated. You survived, so Trent kept Sokolov's network hunting you. Why? Mara demanded. What was the point? What was so important that he'd kill an entire unit? Hayward swiped to another file. We're still piecing it together, but it looks like there was a weapons cache in Kazakhstan. Advanced systems that weren't supposed to exist. Your team was sent in to verify its location, but Trent was working with Sokolov to move those weapons before anyone could document them. Your team stumbled into a handoff operation, witnesses who needed to be eliminated. Mara felt rage building in her chest, hot and pure. Where is he now? Washington, Hayward said. In his office at the Pentagon, surrounded by security. Untouchable. She paused. For now. But with Brennan's testimony and the evidence we're gathering, we can build a case. It'll take time, but no, Mara said. Hayward blinked. No? He's had 3 years, Mara said. 3 years to cover his tracks, destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses. You give him time, he'll find a way out. Men like that always do. What are you suggesting? Mara looked at the tablet, at General Trent's photograph, at the face of the man who'd sent her team to die, and then tried to bury the truth in their graves. I'm suggesting we don't give him time, she said. I'm suggesting we force his hand, make him panic, make him make mistakes. Hayward studied her carefully. What do you have in mind? Mara's smile was sharp, cold. I'm going to walk into the Pentagon tomorrow morning and request a meeting with General Trent, face to face. I'm going to tell him I know everything, and I'm going to watch him decide whether to try covering it up or silencing me. That's incredibly dangerous, Hayward said. If he's willing to kill, he can't touch me in the Pentagon, Mara interrupted. Too many witnesses, too much scrutiny. But his reaction? That'll tell us everything we need to know. And whatever he does next, whatever move he makes to protect himself, that's when we catch him. Hayward was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. You're using yourself as bait, again. It's what I'm good at, Mara said, and this time I'm walking in with eyes open and the full weight of the FBI behind me. Right? Hayward's expression was unreadable. Then she extended her hand. Right. They shook, a compact sealed in moonlight and salt air. We move tomorrow, Hayward said. I'll have a team in place at the Pentagon, ready to document everything. You wear a wire, you get him talking, and when he tries to run or cover up or call in favors, we'll be there. Mara nodded. What about tonight? Tonight you get some sleep, Hayward said. Because tomorrow you're going to war with a 2-star general, and you're going to need every advantage you can get. She walked away, leaving Mara alone on the beach again. Mara looked out at the ocean, at the endless dark water rolling toward shore. Somewhere out there, 3 years ago, she'd been a different person. A soldier following orders, trusting the chain of command, believing in the system. That person was gone. Buried in the mountains of Kazakhstan along with her team. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the woman standing here now, scarred, tested, unbreakable, was who she'd needed to become. Tomorrow she would face the man who'd tried to erase her, and she would make sure the world remembered every name he'd tried to bury. Mara Kincaid walked back to her car, started the engine, and drove into the night. Behind her, the ocean kept its eternal rhythm. Ahead of her, dawn was coming, and with it, the final reckoning. Dawn broke over Washington with the kind of cold clarity that made everything sharp-edged and unforgiving. Mara stood outside the Pentagon, watching early morning staffers flow through security checkpoints, their faces buried in phones and coffee cups, oblivious to the war about to unfold in their midst. She wore civilian clothes, dark slacks, a simple blouse, a jacket that concealed the wire taped to her ribs. Her hair was pulled back, her face bare of makeup. She looked like what she was, someone who'd stopped hiding. Agent Hayward materialized beside her, speaking quietly into an earpiece. Surveillance team is in position. We have eyes on Trent's office, the corridors, every exit. Audio check? Mara tapped the wire once. In her ear, a voice confirmed. We hear you, Lieutenant, loud and clear. Remember, Hayward said, you're there to get him talking. Make him think you're alone, vulnerable. The moment he incriminates himself or makes a move against you, we extract. Understood, Mara said. But she was thinking about her team in Kazakhstan, about Colonel Vance, about 3 years of running. This wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. This was about looking the man who'd orchestrated all of it in the eye and making him understand that he'd failed. She walked through security, her credentials checked and rechecked. The guards looked at her strangely. Maybe they'd seen the news coverage, recognized her face from the hospital siege, but they waved her through. The Pentagon's corridors were exactly as she remembered from her few visits years ago. Endless hallways, military precision, the quiet hum of power. She took the elevator to the 4th floor, following signs toward the DIA offices. General Marcus Trent's suite was at the end of a secured corridor. 2 Marines stood guard outside, their expressions neutral. Mara approached, keeping her pace steady. Lieutenant Mara Kincaid to see General Trent, she said. He's expecting me.
What?
That was a lie. She'd sent an email an hour ago through official channels, requesting an urgent meeting regarding operational irregularities in classified Central Asian deployments. She'd gambled that Trent's curiosity, or paranoia, would override protocol. One of the Marines spoke into his radio, listened, then nodded. Go ahead, ma'am. The door opened into a reception area where an aide sat behind a desk, looking simultaneously harried and suspicious. Beyond him was another door, solid oak, with a brass nameplate. The general will see you, the aide said, though he looked like he wanted to ask questions. 5 minutes. Mara walked past him and pushed open the door. General Marcus Trent's office was everything you'd expect from a 2-star with 30 years of service. Polished wood, military memorabilia, photographs with presidents and foreign dignitaries. The man himself stood by the window, looking out over the Potomac, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn when she entered. Lieutenant Kincaid, he said, his voice carrying that particular brand of authority that came from decades of being obeyed without question. Or should I say the ghost of Lieutenant Kincaid? I was told you died in Kazakhstan. Reports of my death were premature, Mara said, closing the door behind her. As you well know. Trent finally turned. He was exactly as his photograph suggested, distinguished, composed, with the kind of face that inspired confidence in congressional hearings. But his eyes were calculating, measuring her like a problem to be solved. I know nothing of the sort, he said smoothly. I'm simply pleased to see that the reports were incorrect. Please, sit. Mara remained standing. I'll stand, thanks. This won't take long. Trent moved to his desk, settling into the leather chair with practiced ease. Your email mentioned operational irregularities. I assume you're referring to the incident at Ashford Memorial Hospital. Quite the mess. I understand you performed admirably under difficult circumstances. I'm referring to Kazakhstan, Mara said flatly. 3 years ago. The mission you authorized that sent my team into an ambush. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Trent's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. If you have concerns about a specific operation, there are proper channels. Thomas Brennan, Mara interrupted. Viktor Sokolov. A weapons cache that wasn't supposed to exist. A team that witnessed something they shouldn't have, so you had them eliminated. Trent was very still. Those are serious allegations, Lieutenant. Allegations without evidence are simply conspiracy theories. I have evidence, Mara said. Brennan's encrypted files. Testimony from Captain Dalton. Documents showing you personally authorized the Kazakhstan deployment despite red flags in the intelligence. And I have my own testimony about what I saw in that safe house. You meeting with Sokolov 2 days before my team was deployed. That was a bluff. Mara had never seen Trent in the safe house, but she watched his face carefully, looking for the tell. There. A microscopic tightening around his eyes. He'd been there. You're mistaken, Trent said, but his voice had lost some of its smoothness. I've never met Viktor Sokolov. I've never been to Kazakhstan, and I certainly didn't authorize any operation that resulted in American casualties. Then explain Colonel Vance, Mara pressed. He started asking questions about the mission, about why the intelligence was faulty, about who in the chain of command had approved it, and then he died in a very convenient training accident. Trent stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. Colonel Vance's death was investigated thoroughly. It was a tragedy, but accidents happen. Brennan confessed to arranging it, Mara said, on your orders. The silence that followed was absolute. Trent walked to the window again, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was different, quieter, more dangerous. Let's say, hypothetically, that you're correct about some of these details, he said. Let's say there was an operation that went wrong, that mistakes were made, that difficult decisions had to be implemented to protect national security. He turned to face her. What exactly do you think happens now, Lieutenant? You face justice, Mara said. Trent laughed. It was a short, bitter sound. Justice? You think this is about justice? This is about protecting operations that keep this country safe. Sometimes that requires sacrifices. Sometimes good people die so that classified programs remain classified. 6 soldiers died in Kazakhstan, Mara said, her voice hard. My team. People with families. With futures. They died because you were running an illegal weapons transfer with a foreign intelligence operative. They died because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, Trent corrected. And yes, measures were taken to contain the situation, to prevent a scandal that would have compromised ongoing operations across 3 continents. He moved closer, his eyes locked on hers. You were supposed to die too, Lieutenant. The fact that you didn't has been a persistent problem. Is that a confession? Mara asked. It's a statement of fact, Trent said. And here's another fact. You walked into my office alone, making wild accusations, with no backup and no proof that will hold up in any courtroom. Do you really think anyone will believe the word of a supposedly dead soldier over a decorated general with 3 decades of service? Actually, Mara said quietly, I'm not alone. She tapped the wire under her jacket. Trent's face went white. The door burst open. FBI agents flooded in, weapons drawn, moving with tactical precision. Agent Hayward was right behind them, her credentials out. General Marcus Trent, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, unauthorized weapons trafficking, and violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Hayward said. You have the right to remain silent. Trent moved fast for a man his age. His hand shot to the desk drawer, pulling it open, reaching for something inside. 2 agents had him pinned before he could grab whatever weapon he kept there. They forced him face down onto the desk, cuffing his hands behind his back while he cursed and struggled. You've made a mistake, Trent snarled, his composure completely shattered. I have friends in the Pentagon, in Congress. This won't stick. I'll be out by tomorrow. Maybe, Hayward said calmly. But your confession was recorded and witnessed by a dozen federal agents. Your communications with Brennan are being decrypted as we speak. And we have testimony from 3 different sources placing you at operational meetings where Kazakhstan was discussed. She nodded to her team. Take him. They hauled Trent upright, his silver hair disheveled, his face flushed with rage. As they pulled him toward the door, he looked back at Mara. This doesn't change anything, he said. Those soldiers still died. Vance is still dead. You think destroying my career brings them back? Mara stepped closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. No. But it means they didn't die for nothing. It means the truth came out. And it means you'll spend whatever's left of your life knowing that a soldier you tried to bury was the one who put you in prison. Trent's expression twisted with hatred, but he had no response. The agents dragged him out into the corridor where other Pentagon personnel were gathering, their faces shocked and confused. Word would spread fast. By lunchtime, every office in the building would know that General Marcus Trent had been arrested. By evening, it would be on every news channel. By tomorrow, congressional hearings would be scheduled. The machine was already turning. Mara stood in the empty office, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Hayward approached, speaking into her radio to coordinate the evidence collection. You did good, Hayward said. Better than good. That confession will seal the case. What happens now? Mara asked. Now we build the prosecution, Hayward said. Brennan's already cooperating. He's giving us names of everyone involved in the weapons transfers, the cover-ups, all of it. Combined with Trent's confession and the documentary evidence, we're looking at a conspiracy that reaches pretty high up the chain. She paused. You'll need to testify, probably multiple times. Grand jury, preliminary hearings, the trial itself. I'll be there, Mara said. Hayward nodded. I know you will, you. She gestured toward the door. Come on, let's get you out of here before this turns into a media circus. They walked through the Pentagon corridors, past clusters of military personnel and civilian staffers who stared as they passed. Mara could hear whispers, could feel the weight of recognition. By now, everyone knew who she was, the nurse from Crescent Bay, the combat medic who'd taken down Viktor Sokolov's network, the soldier who'd come back from the dead. She didn't mind the stares anymore. Let them look. Let them see what happened when someone refused to stay buried. Outside, the morning had warmed into a bright, clear day. Mara stood on the Pentagon steps, looking out at the city spread before her. Somewhere in that sprawl of buildings and monuments, decisions were being made, justice was grinding forward, and the truth about Kazakhstan was finally being acknowledged. Her phone buzzed. A text from Commander Cross. Saw the news. Well done, Lieutenant. When you're ready to talk about that reinstatement offer, call me. Another text, this one from her sister Sarah. Mom wants to know when you're coming home. We have 3 years of birthdays to catch up on. And a final message from Captain Dalton. Heard you got him. Thank you for everything. Mara smiled, something warm spreading through her chest. She'd spent 3 years invisible, 3 years running from shadows and ghosts. But standing here in the sunlight, surrounded by the evidence of her victory, she realized something fundamental had changed. She wasn't running anymore, and she wasn't invisible. She was exactly who she'd always been, a soldier who kept her promises, who protected the people who couldn't protect themselves, who refused to let the truth stay buried just because powerful men wanted it that way. A car pulled up. Agent Reeves at the wheel. He leaned out the window. Lieutenant? Deputy Director Hayward asked me to give you a lift, anywhere you need to go. Mara thought about it. She could go back to Crescent Bay, to the apartment she'd rented and the life she'd built there. But that life had been about hiding, about being someone else. Or she could go forward. Take me to Ashford Memorial Hospital, she said, climbing into the car. Reeves raised an eyebrow. The hospital where I saved a man's life and got fired for it, Mara finished. Yeah, that one. The drive back to Crescent Bay took 4 hours. Mara spent most of it on the phone, first with her family, making plans to visit, promising to explain everything. Then with Commander Cross, discussing the Navy's reinstatement offer, the possibility of returning to active duty in a training capacity, teaching the next generation of combat medics. And finally with Agent Hayward, who called with updates. Trent was in federal custody, his security clearances revoked, his career in ruins. The investigation was expanding to include others in the DIA who'd helped cover up Kazakhstan. Brennan was providing detailed testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. Everything was moving forward, unstoppable, now that the truth was out. When they arrived at Ashford Memorial, the parking lot was quieter than it had been during the siege. Normal operations had resumed, though security was visibly tighter. Mara walked through the main entrance, her footsteps echoing across the lobby. The receptionist looked up, did a double take, and immediately reached for her phone. Within minutes, people were appearing from various departments: nurses, orderlies, administrators. They stared at her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Mara walked past them all, heading for the administrative wing. Dr. Victor Hastings' office was empty, his nameplate already removed from the door. According to the news reports, he'd resigned pending the federal investigation, his medical license under review, his reputation destroyed. But that wasn't why Mara was here. She found Sandra in the break room, still wearing her supervisor badge, drinking coffee that smelled like it had been sitting in the pot since yesterday. When Sandra saw Mara, her eyes went wide. "Mara? What are you—" "They said you were in Washington." "I was," Mara said. "Now I'm here. Can we talk?" They sat in the empty break room, and Mara explained. Not everything, the classified details, would stay classified, but enough. About her past, about why she'd been at the hospital, about what had really happened during the siege. Sandra listened, her coffee growing cold in her hands. When Mara finished, the older nurse was quiet for a long moment. "So you really are military," Sandra said finally. "All this time you were just pretending to be a regular nurse?" "I wasn't pretending," Mara said. "I was trying to be normal, to have a life that didn't involve combat, or classified operations, or people trying to kill me, but—" She paused. "Turns out I'm not very good at normal." Sandra laughed, a short, surprised sound. "Normal is overrated anyway." She set down her coffee cup. "What are you going to do now? Go back to the military?" Mara considered the question. "Maybe. I don't know yet. But first I wanted to come back here, to see the people who worked beside me, who saw me do the impossible and didn't question it, to say thank you." "Thank us?" Sandra shook her head. "Mara, you saved lives. You saved Dalton. You saved the hostages. You stopped those men." "And you all trusted me," Mara interrupted. "When Hastings fired me, when the media was calling me reckless, you knew different. That matters." Sandra reached across the table, squeezing Mara's hand. "For what it's worth, we'd hire you back in a heartbeat, if you wanted to stay." Mara smiled. "I appreciate that, but I think my days of being invisible are over." She left the hospital as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the corridors where she'd spent a year being nobody. The building felt different now, smaller, maybe, or just less significant. It had been a refuge once. Now it was just a place she'd pass through on her way to something else. Outside, Agent Reeves was waiting by the car. "Where to now, Lieutenant?" Mara pulled out her phone, looking at the messages again, her family waiting for her, the Navy offering her a future, Commander Cross asking when she wanted to start training the next generation of medics. Opportunities. Possibilities. A life lived in the open instead of the shadows. "Home," she said. "Take me home." The drive to her sister's house took another 3 hours. The sun was setting when they pulled up to a modest suburban home with a well-kept lawn and a tire swing in the front yard. Before Mara could even open the car door, the front door burst open and her sister was running toward her, followed by their mother, both of them crying and laughing and pulling her into embraces that felt like coming back to life. Inside there was chaos, her nephew showing her drawings, her mother making tea with shaking hands, Sarah asking 1,000 questions while simultaneously refusing to let go of Mara's arm. The house smelled like home, like memories she'd locked away for 3 years. They talked late into the night. Mara told them what she could, leaving out the classified parts but sharing enough that they understood. About Kazakhstan, about going into hiding, about building a new life in Crescent Bay and having it torn apart, about choosing to fight back instead of running. Her mother cried when Mara described the ambush, when she talked about the team members who'd died. Sarah held her hand when she explained about Colonel Vance, about the guilt he'd carried until someone decided that guilt made him a liability. "I thought I'd lost you forever," her mother said quietly, her voice thick. When those officers came to the door, when they told me you were gone, she couldn't finish. I'm sorry, Mara said. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you, that I let you believe. Don't, Sarah interrupted. Don't apologize for surviving, for doing what you had to do. She looked at Mara with fierce pride. You're here now. You're alive. That's what matters. They fell asleep in the living room, Mara on the couch with her nephew curled against her side, her mother and sister in chairs nearby, like they were afraid that if they went to their rooms, she might disappear again. Mara lay awake long after the others had drifted off, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the past 3 years slowly lifting. The fear was still there. It would probably always be there, some part of her forever checking exits and watching shadows. But it was manageable now, controlled. She'd faced the people who wanted her dead and walked away alive. She'd exposed the corruption that had killed her team. She'd ensured that the truth wouldn't stay buried. She'd won. The next morning, Mara woke to the smell of coffee and pancakes. Her mother was cooking breakfast, humming something old and familiar. Sarah was setting the table, talking about plans, a family dinner, maybe a small party to celebrate Mara being home. Normal things, peaceful things. Mara's phone rang. Commander Cross. Lieutenant, he said when she answered. I won't keep you long. I know you're with your family, but I wanted to let you know, Captain Dalton came through his surgery successfully. Full recovery expected within 6 months. Relief washed through her. That's good news. He asked me to tell you something, Cross continued. He said the two of you are even now. You saved his life twice. He helped you take down Sokolov, but he'd like to buy you a drink when he's back on his feet. Mara smiled. Tell him I'll take him up on that. Will do. Cross paused. Have you thought any more about the reinstatement offer? Mara looked around the kitchen at her family preparing breakfast, at the life she'd thought she'd lost forever. Then she thought about the skills she had, the training, the ability to save lives in impossible situations. She thought about the next generation of medics who'd face their own impossible situations, who'd need someone to teach them not just the techniques, but the mentality. How to keep going when everything was falling apart, how to make life or death decisions in seconds, how to come home from the darkness. I have, she said, and I'm interested, but on my terms. I want to teach, train the next class of combat medics. No field deployments, no classified operations. Just passing on what I know to people who need it. I think we can arrange that, Cross said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Welcome back, Lieutenant. They talked logistics, when she could start, where she'd be stationed, what her responsibilities would entail. It felt right, like pieces clicking into place. When she hung up, Sarah was watching her from the doorway. You're going back, her sister said. Not a question. Yeah, Mara admitted, but different this time. No more secrets, no more hiding, and I'll be close enough to visit on weekends. Sarah crossed the room, pulling her into a hug. You do what you need to do. Just promise you'll stay in touch this time. Real contact, regular calls, not another 3 years of radio silence. I promise, Mara said. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Mara testified before a grand jury, her words helping to indict not just Trent, but 3 other senior officials who'd been part of the Kazakhstan cover-up. The media coverage was intense, but Mara declined all interview requests, letting her testimony speak for itself. Dr. Victor Hastings lost his medical license and faced multiple lawsuits from the families of hostages who'd been endangered by his actions. He'd issued a public apology, but it rang hollow. Some mistakes couldn't be undone with words. Thomas Brennan pleaded guilty to multiple charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, 25 years instead of life. He'd provided enough intelligence to dismantle what remained of Sokolov's network across 3 continents. And General Marcus Trent went to trial. Mara attended every day of the proceedings, sitting in the gallery with the families of her fallen teammates. She watched as prosecutors laid out the evidence, the documents, the recordings, the testimony from dozens of witnesses. She watched Trent's defense team try to paint him as a patriot making hard choices, and she watched the jury reject that narrative. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, Mara felt something inside her finally settle. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not even happiness. Just closure. Trent was sentenced to 30 years in a federal prison. No possibility of parole. His rank was stripped, his pension revoked, his legacy destroyed. As he was led from the courtroom, he looked at Mara one final time. She met his gaze steadily, and after a moment, he looked away. He was the one who'd been erased now. Struck from history, his name forever associated with corruption and betrayal instead of service and honor. Mara walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine, surrounded by her family and the teammates' relatives who'd become like family over the weeks of the trial. They went to dinner together, sharing stories about the soldiers who'd died, remembering them not as victims but as the people they'd been, heroes who deserved to be remembered. 2 months later, Mara stood in front of her first class of combat medic trainees at a military medical facility in Virginia. 23 students, most of them younger than she'd been when she deployed to Kazakhstan, all of them eager and terrified and determined. She looked at their faces and saw herself, idealistic, well-trained, but unprepared for the reality of what they'd face in the field. "My name is Lieutenant Mara Kincaid," she said, her voice carrying across the classroom. "And I'm here to teach you how to save lives under the worst conditions imaginable. Some of you will face situations where the book answer isn't good enough, where you'll have to make choices that could mean life or death in seconds. This course is going to prepare you for those moments." She paused, making eye contact with each student. "But before we start, I want you to understand something. Being a combat medic isn't about following protocols. It's about refusing to give up. It's about looking at an impossible situation and finding the one thread you can pull to change the outcome. It's about being the person who steps forward when everyone else freezes." One of the students raised her hand, a young woman, maybe 22, with determination written across her face. "Is it true you performed a thoracotomy in a civilian hospital to save a Navy SEAL?" "It's true," Mara said, "and I got fired for it. And then I helped bring down a foreign intelligence operative and a corrupt general. But that's not important right now. What's important is what you learn in this classroom." She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. "Let's begin." The months turned into a year. Mara settled into her new life, teaching during the week, visiting her family on weekends, slowly rebuilding connections she'd severed when she went into hiding. She attended the wedding of one of her former hospital colleagues, went to her nephew's birthday parties, had dinner with Captain Dalton when he finally recovered enough to make good on his promise of that drink. She wasn't invisible anymore, but she also wasn't defined by the trauma she'd survived. She was simply Mara Kincaid, instructor, sister, daughter, survivor. And she was content with that. On the 3rd anniversary of the Kazakhstan ambush, Mara drove to Arlington National Cemetery. She stood before the memorial wall where her teammates' names were carved in stone, running her fingers over the letters. Rodriguez, Chen, Martinez, DeMarco, Sullivan, Kovic. 6 names, 6 lives, 6 people who deserved better than what they'd gotten. "We got him," she said quietly to the names on the wall. "Trent, Brennan, all of them. They're in prison. The truth came out. You didn't die for nothing." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of summer flowers. Mara stood there for a long time, saying goodbye to the ghost she'd been carrying for 3 years. When she finally turned to leave, she felt lighter. Not unburdened, she'd carry her teammates with her forever, but no longer crushed under the weight. She walked back to her car and pulled out her phone. There was a message from Commander Cross. "New class of trainees arriving next week. Thought you'd like to know. Application numbers are up 40% since you started teaching. Word is spreading about the instructor who refuses to accept impossible odds." Mara smiled and typed a response. "Good. We need more people who refuse to quit." She started the car and pulled out of the cemetery, heading back toward her life. The road stretched ahead of her, full of possibilities and tomorrows and moments yet to come. Behind her, 6 names carved in stone stood as testament to sacrifice and service. And ahead of her, 23 students waited to learn how to save lives from someone who'd learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Mara Kincaid had been erased once, declared dead, made invisible. But she'd come back. She'd fought her way out of the darkness, exposed the truth, and claimed her life on her own terms. And now she was making sure that the next generation knew how to do the same. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was exactly who she'd always meant to be. A soldier who refused to stay down. A medic who refused to let people die. A woman who refused to let powerful men bury the truth. And she was done apologizing for any of it. The sun was setting as she drove back to base, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere behind her, the Pentagon still stood, its corridors emptier by one corrupt general. Somewhere ahead, students waited to learn from someone who'd survived the impossible. Mara turned up the radio and smiled. She'd spent 3 years being invisible. The rest of her life, she'd make damn sure she was seen, and that was a future worth living for.